July. It's hot, it's dry, the grass is crispy, and when the shadows lengthen into evening, you're sure to hear that dreamy, nostalgic soundtrack of midsummer. I'm talking about the pulsating sound of what we always call July flies. It is, I believe, an annual cicada that comes out every year, not like the 13 and 17-year brood emergences that we've seen in recent years. I don't know how widespread it is regionally, but I grew up knowing that they were as reliable as the calendar in welcoming in the crowning month of the season. In particular, I remember my mother's delight at their arrival and her recollection of her mother's joy in hearing them for the first time each year. And so, I grew up loving them and welcoming them. And though we never saw them, I remember feeling nothing but comfort and familiarity in their raucous presence, and just feeling the rightness of all the world in my heart as they serenaded our warm nights. For some people that haven't grown up with the backdrop of this sound, it can be a little bit intimidating. For someone not used to it, it can sound like you're surrounded by bugs, which you are, and can be a bit unnerving. But for us, they were the soundtrack of summer, along with the sounds of kids playing outside, dogs barking, neighbors chatting, sprinklers whirring, mothers calling, the drone of lawnmowers, and then through the hot nights, in the days before air conditioning in the home was a thing, the lovely, soothing sound of the attic fan as it drew the cool night air through the house, lulling us all to sleep. I loved the attic fan. We don't have one in our house here, and I miss it. I've asked about having one put in, but there seems to be a problem retrofitting it into this old farmhouse. We do have air conditioning upstairs now, but I confess to sleeping with the window open a little bit anyway, because I really need to hear the night noises. Although I do appreciate air conditioning, especially as we seem to be hitting more and more record high temperatures every summer, I actually don't like it, and I avoid it until it's absolutely necessary. I think this is because I grew up in a time before it was so common, especially in homes. And in the summer, you just got used to it, and you found ways to cope. We hopped on our bikes or went to the pool, or in the hottest part of the day, you'd sit in front of the window fan with a book and a tab. Does anyone listening here remember tab? It's a well-documented fact that air conditioning has changed our society profoundly. It has transformed building design, making high-rises possible for one thing, and homes could be built without so much reliance on natural temperature controls like high ceilings and thick walls. It also changed neighborhoods because it drew people inside instead of out to the front porch or the yard to cool off, which meant you were interacting with your neighbors on a regular basis. Where now, people stay mostly behind closed doors. It's also brought children inside where they can not only escape the summer heat, but they can be entertained by screens for hours on end. And it has shifted demographics, too. A lot more people have moved to the southern United States in the last 50 years, and to super hot places like Dubai. And I don't know the science on it, but it makes sense to me that it has changed our bodies as well. Being chilled in an artificially climate-controlled building when it's in the 90s outside can't be good for our body's ability to adapt to the extremes. I really don't like feeling cold indoors when the sun is blazing hot. But it does seem to be necessary for all of the millions and millions of workplaces and schools and offices to remain functional. It seems that the more we cool the air where we live and work, the more we demand it. At the same time, the energy it takes to power the roughly 2 billion air conditioning units now in operation around the world is contributing to global warming. And here I quote from The Guardian on, quote, "The awful irony of this feedback loop. Warmer temperatures lead to more air conditioning. More air conditioning leads to warmer temperatures," unquote. I don't know what to do with that conundrum except to say that it's just one more example of our perceived human disconnection from the natural world. I say perceived because there's really no disconnection. There can't be because we're just as much a part of the living world as every other life form, even when we avoid it and flee indoors because the temperature is uncomfortable. All of this is not a diatribe against air conditioning because, let's face it, air conditioning saves lives. But as a practice in slow living through the seasons, it's okay sometimes to lean into and experience the warmth of summer in an intentional way. To let ourselves sweat a little, not because we're working out, but because it's hot out and our bodies have a miraculous mechanism for cooling us down. It's okay to feel that. Obviously, if the temperatures are dangerously high, or if you're dehydrated or have a medical condition that prohibits being in the heat, don't do it. There are reasons for people not to do this. If that's you, please seek out the AC and do whatever you need to do to be safe. But if you're a healthy person who has to spend a lot of time indoors in air conditioning during the hot months, and it happens to be just a good old hot July day, consider going outside and finding a shady spot somewhere to sit down and just be there for a few moments. It's a wonderful thing just to feel summer. Let your skin get a little dewy. Don't be afraid to sweat. Let your body do its thing in regulating your body temperature. Maybe you'll catch a breeze and enjoy the beautiful relief of the air cooling you rather than a giant machine. It's sweet, it's gentle, and yes, fleeting. And you'll know when you've had enough of this exercise. So then, go inside and hydrate yourself and chill out in the AC and be grateful for it, especially these days. So anyway, it's amazing to observe all the living things that love the heat and the full sun and even the humidity. The garden is lush and robust, teeming with all forms of life. The rate of growth of some of the plants is phenomenal. Unfortunately, not all of those are what I want going gangbusters, but the surge of vitality is impressive. Even with the lack of rain, there's so many plants that show no signs of wavering whatsoever. It really gives meaning behind the label drought tolerant. This is one of the reasons why implementing native species into your landscape is not only prudent, but is wise in that it helps restore your local ecosystem in a way that is incredibly effective. July is a month when you can take it a little easy in the garden, not only because much of the day is really too hot to be out in it, but because for the most part, planting is done and things are just growing. Sure, there is always the weeding, but maybe we don't have to worry too much about it at this point. And the harvesting of things like cucumbers, squash, and maybe even peppers has begun. But that intense phase of getting the garden in is complete. Enjoy the pause because, as you know, in the weeks to come, the produce will be pouring in and the task quickly turn into preparing and preserving the wonderful food that you're growing. Even though July isn't typically a time we think much about planting, I actually do something that's probably not advisable, but I have my reasons. I will use the fertile days this month to dig up and move things around, especially things like coneflowers or bee balm or ground covers that can be dug up in clumps and placed in a new spot with the root ball intact. The reason I do this is because I like to move things when they are in their full expression in terms of size and even blooms, so that I can better tell where it needs to go. This can be a bit tricky with the heat, but I've done it a lot and had really good luck with it. You can check out my article on midsummer transplants in our Substack for more details on this. The link will be in the show notes. As for gardening by the signs, we begin the month with the waning moon in the very fruitful Taurus on the 1st and 2nd. Then the 3rd and the 4th in dry and barren Gemini. Good for weeding. That takes us to the new moon on the 5th. 5th and the 6th and the waxing moon in Cancer are very fertile. And if it's not too hot, you might try some transplanting, as I just mentioned. The next 5 days are barren, so again, time to weed if you feel up to it. I found that I really enjoy going out with my coffee really early in the morning, just after I get up, and spend some meditative time literally in the weeds while it's cool. Then on the 12th through the 16th in Libra and Scorpio, we're back to the fertile days, with Libra being an ideal time to plant or move flowers. The full buck moon will be on the 21st, so called because the antlers of the male deer are fully grown by now. A couple of alternative names for the July moon highlight significant seasonal events, such as the salmon moon or the corn moon, indicating the harvest time for different foods in the Native American traditions. In slow living through the seasons, it's meaningful to observe when things are in bloom or ripening. Indigenous people did it as a necessity in gathering food throughout the year. Most of us, of course, can obtain food now, whether it's in season or not. And though it takes some intention to observe and appreciate the earth's timing for our food, it is a meaningful way to connect to the seasons and to the source of our sustenance. And believe it or not, it's not too early to start planning for your fall garden. You could start some of those cool weather crop seeds inside on the fruitful days at the end of the month, in Pisces on the 24th and 25th, and Taurus on the 28th and 29th. Then transplant them outside when the temperatures start coming down. Otherwise, in the garden, wonderful things like cucumbers, squash, beans, and peppers are going to start coming in fast and furious this month. I'm a big fan of fermented foods, so for my seasonal kitchen share this month, I'm going to tell you how to do it. This is so easy you won't believe it, and it's a fantastic way to add nutrient density and probiotics into your diet. If you know, you know. Let's start with cucumbers in a quart jar. Slice them up, and in the case of cucumbers specifically, leave off the very end pieces. This will help them stay crisp. Place them tightly in the jar. Dissolve about 1 generous tablespoon of salt in a cup of water and pour it in, adding more water to fill it until it covers the vegetables. If the water is good and salty, almost too salty to taste, you can add more if needed. You're good to go. Place a grape leaf or a black tea bag on the top to cover the veggies. This also helps preserve a nice crunch. And put a lid on it. Turn the jar upside down a few times to make sure the salt is dispersed. Then place it on your counter out of the sunlight. You'll quickly see bubbles forming. This means it's working. And after about 3 days, give them a taste. If you like it, put it in the fridge and enjoy them chilled, straight from the jar. If you think the brine is too salty, you can simply rinse them off before serving to tone it down. These are so tasty and good for you. You can also add dill, onion, garlic, etc. to the jar when you're setting up the ferment. Play around with it and see what you think. I'll link this in the show notes as well. Okay, well, this brings us to the close of episode 12 of the Slow Living Through the Seasons series. For those of you following along, that means we've now completed a full journey around the sun with seasonal reflections, memories, gardening guidance, tips, and a whole year of planting and gardening by the signs of the moon. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. So, where do we go from here? For now, I'm going to take a little pause and take some time to soak up all the summer goodness while waiting for a very special arrival later this month. I'm about to become a grandmother for the first time, and if ever there was a time to savor, this is it. But then, I'd really love to pick up this discussion again, but in a different format this time. I'd love to bring it more directly into the community for sharing and conversation, adding more personal interaction into the experience. I'm thinking a lot about it right now and would love to hear any of your ideas around this. For anyone interested, let's talk about it. You're welcome to call our phone line and leave a message. The number is 443-459-1950. Or email thegooddirtpodcast@gmail.com. That's thegooddirtpodcast@gmail.com. And for updates on this and all that's going on at Lady Farmer and the Good Dirt Podcast, make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter on Substack. The link is in the show notes, and it's free to join. We'll be keeping you updated there. So before I close, I have a little haiku to share with you, bringing us back around to the cicadas. Welcome, July flies, serenading our warm nights. You are summer joy. That's it for now. We'll be back later. Stay tuned. Goodbye.